Mesdames et messieurs, merci d'accueillir l'équipe de Furiosa, une saga Mad Max. So, I'm just gonna start by introducing you all. To my left, the producer of the film, Doug Mitchell. His left, Chris Hemsworth. Back at the end of the table, Tom Burke. Anya Taylor-Joy. And Monsieur le réalisateur, George Miller. George, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. Mad Max is part of our life for 45 years now. This is and we're just audience member. And I cannot imagine what it must have been like for you yesterday night during the standing ovation that was absolutely crazy after the screening. Did you think of all those 45 years that you lived with Max?
I didn't last night. I was just thinking about the movie I just saw because we only finished 2.5 weeks ago, and that was the best sound I've heard, and I was delighted by the screening, and of course by the response of people. So I didn't, but I often think about while I'm making the films, I keep thinking about what happened on previous ones and what I learned and so on.
How do you explain this, that it went so long, that this popularity is still here?
You know, you can't really, but if I had to sort of suggest some things, I think by some luck they were allegorical stories, all of them. It was here in France with the first Mad Max that they said, I think critics and people made the comments that they were westerns on wheels. And that suddenly occurred to me, yes, they have a lot in common with the westerns as allegories, in the same way that in Japan they said, oh, Mad Max is a samurai. And there's a connection with all of those things. And probably the most amazing of them, of course, is Kurosawa, who was inspired by the westerns, and the westerns were inspired by his work and so on. So I think it's within that tradition, I think.
A question for all of you, very simply. What was the feeling yesterday during this ovation at the end? Let's start with you, Tom.
Me?
Yeah, sorry.
It was really nice. It was just nice. It was like, somebody asked me what I was feeling like before, and I said the two words that come to mind are electric and jelly, and which was a slightly unstable feeling, and just at the end it was just a very kind of warm glow of pride and joy. Yeah.
Anya.
It's really quite extraordinary to experience something through the eyes of an audience. I think all of us are so in love with film, but that naturally kind of means that you always have a moment where you know too much. You know too much of the tricks behind the camera. Like you can't really distance yourself. And yesterday, for the first time, I really felt like I could watch it like an audience member, and I was so blown away by it, blown away by the pacing, the sound design, just absolutely every single element that our incredible team brought to it. And that's really a testament to George, because, you know, there are people that have worked on this movie that were retired, and they come out of retirement for George Miller. They come out of retirement to make Furiosa. So I just felt really proud of our whole team.
Chris?
Yeah, I came out of retirement.
That's right. Yeah, it's incredible. This is my first time to the festival, and to be here with George and this cast and production. The Mad Max franchise and world holds a very special place in my heart, being Australian. So it was vivid and had a wonderful sort of nostalgia about my childhood, and the response at the end, it rang the bell of gratitude in my heart for the opportunity, and you know, for thanks to George for bringing me into the space, and also to the audience who have such a passion for these films and have kept them alive for so many years. So it was a real honor.
Doug?
Look, it's a privilege to be in France. You know, we thank Thierry and Iris for inviting us. But this is a spectacular film to watch on the best screen in the world yesterday rather. And the other two quick observations is I've been with George for 43 years and watched him evolve into a filmmaker of great, you know, one of the best in the world, perhaps one of the best ever. But also what you don't realize is the size of this Australian film. You know, on the table, everybody's an honorary Australian, if not Clan Hemsworth, you know, and very proud of that. But the other part of that is George, you know, has this ability to lead with, by example. He's the hardest working. I mean, this film started 10 years ago after Fury Road. Well, it was written before that, but, you know, the actual build to get the film up. And it's shot with 1,300 people in the crew. Each of them, you know, admires and is loyal to George because of what he does. He leads from the front. And, you know, it's a very difficult film to pull off. We covered like 1,300 people, 2 units, shooting 1,000 miles, 1,000 kilometers apart. And it's 8 months, you know, hard work for everybody. But nobody worked harder than George. And then on through post-production to deliver the sound and the visuals that we saw last night. And I'm very proud of that. Also, the risk that Warner Brothers took in this world where we have difficulty funding any film. Every film is like a war. This one's a massive one. I'm not a war. I mean, I'm glad again to be here in a troubled, you know, world that we have. But yeah, it's a massive film and it's very expensive. And to do that, Warner's had to take a risk, which they've done, and supported by the Australian government, who have massive rebates that allow us to make the film. So thank you to all of us here, particularly, and to you guys, and hopefully the audiences will embrace it. Yeah, thank you.
No doubt about that. I think very question. Yes.
Welcome back. Welcome, Jason Gorver from Canada. George, over the last decade, I'm wondering if you could talk about, you're a pioneer of hybrid between digital cinema and practical effects. I'm wondering if you could talk how much that has changed compared to shooting Fury Road with this production. And if we could talk to the actors, this has been a big year, people talking about stunties and actually giving credit to those that actually help you bring the physicality on screen. If you could talk about your own physical moments on screen, but also those individuals that actually help make you so heroic on screen. So thank you very much and congratulations on the film.
Thank you. Well, the one thing you can say about cinema is that it's always evolving and changing, and particularly the technology. I mean, I started making films in the analog era with celluloid, where it was quite different. And I was lucky enough to work at the beginning of the digital era, roughly the early 90s, particularly with the Babe films and consequently with the Happy Feet movies, where I really got to understand it a lot. And it's one of the vectors which really drives my filmmaking. Story is above all else, and then it's what tools are now available that we can do this with. And it is really interesting how, even though it's only 9 years, how the tools we used on Furiosa were quite different and more advanced in many ways. The cameras, the pre-visualization of all of those things were at a different level. And no doubt, as the years march on, that will, as we know, that will change. That's one of the fascinations for me about the process.
About the stunts? Somebody?
I mean, listen, no action movie, specifically Mad Max, exists without an absolutely unbelievable stunt department. We had the incredible Guy Norris, who was a stuntman on the first ever Mad Max, leading our second unit that was in charge of all of Stowaway. And beyond that, I think when George and I first had a conversation, it was very important to him that I was willing to throw myself into it as much as I possibly could. But even if you are throwing yourself into it as much as you possibly can, there's somebody that has previs that has tested it, that has taught you how to do it. Like, my stunt double, Haley Wright, is my sister. She has been with me consistently. We met on this movie. She's now one of my best friends in the entire world. Everything that she did, I did too. And the most important thing is, rather than it being an environment of aggression in any way of like, you have to do this. It was, I love you, I believe in you, you can do this, and I'm going to help you do it in the best possible way that you can. God, I love these stunt people. They're so wonderful, they're so incredible, and you know what? Best people on set, easy, always.
Can I just add one add on to what's being said here? The other aspect of what this film represents is that every day we all wake up, or especially George, with the reality that we could injure somebody or kill somebody. So the stunt department isn't just there, as talented as they all are, to madly do something. This is broken down from the get-go. It has a tremendous amount of infrastructure underneath it. And there were 264 women and men on that stunt department. One of the sequences took 79 days to shoot. Every day you're subjected to bad weather, COVID, and just exhaustion. And it's important. Our one priority, led by George, is not to injure anybody. That's our first responsibility. The second is to make the film that we enjoy. I just wanted to...
It doesn't make any sense how safe this film was. It doesn't make any sense at all.
All right, I think we got a question over there.
Hi, question here. Rodrigo Fonseca from Correio da Manhã, Rio de Janeiro. A question to Mr. Hemsworth. Amazing character. Dementus seems to have the cruelty of Darth Vader with a touch of the Looney Tunes. What do you believe to be his code of honor, and how would you define his sense of humanity and mercy?
I like that description. Thank you. I'm a big believer in the playfulness of work and one, you know, the two not having to be separate entities. No matter what the subject matter, I think it should be joyful. And the interesting thing about this character initially that struck me was there was this villainous persona, but it was very important for George and I, we discussed this at length, to find the humanity in the character and to sprinkle in moments of vulnerability and understand that he too was a product of the wasteland. He too had suffered tremendously and had a traumatic past. Not to excuse his horrific actions, but you know, to understand that he was responding and trying to survive in a very brutal space. There was a vibrance and a bombastic sort of nature on the page. I felt that this script was very different to the other Mad Max films. We discussed this as well at length, and wanted to lean into the absurdity of the character, wanted to lean into the polarity of him and have him be contradictory and hopefully surprising. I like the way that humor can lull you into a false sense of comfort, so then when you do something that is violent or you know, violent, it's unexpected, you know, as opposed to kind of hinting at it or setting it up in a sort of more obvious way. But to have the freedom to sort of to be inconsistent, as we as humans are, I found creatively very satisfying, and I love every second of the experience, and I really thanks George so much for that.
Darth Vader meets a Looney Tune. I love this one.
Oh, hello. I'm Helen Barlow from Coogee, Australia, but I live in Paris, actually. Hi, how are you? Tom, great bloody Aussie accent, mate. Yeah. Ultra convincing. I once saw saw one of the Mad Max movies with Mel Gibson dubbed into American. Oh. So it's great that this is just so Australian. Congratulations for that, a lot of you. But George, you came from Western Queensland. You grew up in Western Queensland, and I'm just wondering how the desert infected your personality and made you want to set movies there, these movies there in particular. Is it a personal thing a little bit for you?
Well, you know, I grew up in a rural town where at a time there was no television, there was no internet, there was just schools, comics, school books, and the Saturday matinee. And it was a little bit like the movie theatre in town was like a secular cathedral or church. And we'd go there and we'd see a cartoon, newsreels, a serial, and 2 features. And the rest of the time, we were lucky enough with my brothers and I to play. We played actively, making things based on what we saw in the movies, acting out what we saw. We were on horses, we were painting up garbage can lids to look like knights and things like that. And I think I'm doing a very, very similar thing all these decades later. It was a big influence on me in that life.
We're going on the other side of the room.
Márcio Salem, from Cinema com Crítica in Metrópolis. Mr. Miller, with Fury Road, you help audience value action movies as art, as it should be valued. And with Furiosa, you gave it an operatic undertone that heightened its artistic ambitions. It surely is an awesome time to be an action fan, and yet I still think that moviegoers see it solely as an entertainment, escapistic fare, without the same artistic value that drama has, for instance. How to change this perception?
Oh, that's an interesting observation. I think from the beginning, cinema has been kinetic. I've said this many times, but I'm with Kevin Brownlow, who wrote The Parade's Gone By, where he stated that the language of cinema, this new language, which Terry just told me was 130 years old next year, brand new language that we learn before we can read in our own language. That was defined that before sound by the silent filmmakers, and almost all of them, the key ones, were making, let's call them action movies. Buster Keaton in particular, Harold Lloyd, and so many others. So for me, it's pure cinema. For me, it's visual music. I like to think of movies as in two ways: silent movies with sound, or as Alfred Hitchcock said, I like to make movies where they don't have to read the subtitles in Japan. I think it's the core of cinema. So I don't think we have to even worry about your question, even though it's a really interesting observation. And you can do anything with this, with cinema, and it differentiates itself from any other art form. It can only be experienced in a cinema on the screen. It can't be in the theatre. It can't be in life. It can't be written on a word. It can't even be done with graphic novels. So. But interesting observation, thank you.
If you don't mind, a little follow-up on this one. What I found really amazing with your Mad Max, Mr. Miller, is that not one film is like the other. You always find a visual way to tell the stories that is different. And I'm not only talking about the stories themselves. I mean, your cinema is evolving through each of the movies. Could you talk a little bit how you want that, how you want each one of the Mad Max to be different?
Well, for me, there are two things there. I think if you're just repeating what you've done, there's sort of no appetite to do it. You've explored that. And the second thing is why I'm still going, and I never thought I'd be making five. I never thought I'd make 2 Mad Max movies, and now I'm on my 5th. I've often wondered, am I crazy? And then I realize I'm driven by my curiosity. It's a thing, and I feel that I'm learning, and I'm really interested. First of all, as I said before, in the story, and then to find the ways that we can best tell that story through the tools available, as I said. So each story has to be different. What was really interesting about this story, there's a marked difference between a film that, like Fury Road, that you tell on the run and see how much backstory you can pick up, that happened over 3 days and 2 nights. The basically extended scenes almost played in real time, compared to something that's a saga that happens over 18 years. And watching someone come from a child in an extreme world and grow into essentially a mythic warrior to some degree.
Can I just make one observation? I mean, just in context of the 45 years George has been making Mad Max, Chris summarized it beautifully when he said that the Americas have their Batmans and Supermans, England has its Harry Potter, and Australia proudly has Mad Max. Yeah, yeah.
All right, we're going to the back of the room over there.
Yes, hi, my name is Marcus. I work for One Press TV in Sweden. First, I want to say it was an amazing movie. I really loved the movie. And I love the effects, the environment, the locations, and the costumes. So, George, could you just tell us a little bit more about the choice of the locations and the choice of the costumes?
Well, everything that you design or want to be seen in the frame has to serve the story. So every costume is an extension, of course, of the character. Every prop, every weapon, every vehicle. And if you look at all these stories, there's a very strong connection between the aesthetic of the vehicle and, in a sense, the aesthetic of the character. So that's really important. And so it is with the locations. There has to be a progression through the story of those things. Everything serves the progression of the story. And that's not just something that we do casually. That's something that we're with everyone coming together working on the film, that we discuss endlessly. We discuss the organizing ideas that kind of construct that, so that we have a coherent internal logic on absolutely everything you see in the film. Every gesture people make, every bit of makeup, every hair, so everything. I think that answers your question.
And to be fair, that actually kind of connects with this question over here, because the thing about the action sequences is that every single one of them is an extension of a character's want or need. None of them are superfluous, and so because of that, you are being consistently drawn into people and drawn into what they want. And because all of this extends into the exact vehicle that they're driving, exactly what they're wearing, everything serves to make the world deeper and richer. It's not very often that you can be part of a universe where it looks very detailed from far away, and then you walk into it and you go, oh wow, as I get closer, everything's just more and more multi-layered. There's nothing by accident, and I think you can feel that in the filmmaking.
Could I just, something I meant to say about our Australian colleague here. You know, when you mentioned that the first Mad Max was dubbed in the United States, was dubbed with American accents, even though Mel Gibson was American himself, and the film completely flopped in America. Hugh Keith-Burns, who played Turkana, was from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and yet he spoke with a Southern American accent. It took all this time for every accent, almost every accent in this story to be American, to be Australian, and we never even really discussed it. You started speaking in an Australian accent, I think the accent of your grandfather, and then we have someone like Tom arrive and says, I want to do an Australian accent. I said, don't try it, it's too difficult. And great people have tried it, really great people. It's not a common sort of accent. But Tom... Well, yes, but even Meryl at that time, as genius as she is, didn't quite nail it, I believe. That was in the 70s. No, 80s, mid-70s, was it?
That was 35 years ago.
35 years ago. Look, when I first went to the United States and we said we were from Australia, they said, do you speak English? They thought we were Austrian. and anyway, I've just got to say, I thought, okay, Tom, let's see you fail. And suddenly, he's speaking in this Australian accent. He has that ability to, it blew me away. And I've spent a year in the cutting room listening to it. And that's a really nice thing to happen. It's specifically Australia in this story, just to respond to you.
Apparently there's an entire counter of people in the airport for people who are trying to get to Australia and accidentally end up in Austria. Which, like, I don't know about you guys, but that would suck.
All right, we got a question on the end.
Hello, Gregor Vossilis, German Bavarian television Thank you so much for this. It was really an experience. I'm Mr. Miller. I thought a couple of years back with Fury Road, he already basically done it all now. There's no more war battles on the street because it's been done. And again, you surpassed yourself. And I ask myself, where do you get the inspiration? Who do you work with? How do you pull this off? If you've been doing this for 40 years. And the last question to all of you, how are you driving yourselves?
Driving. Boy, look, as I said, as I said, I'm still curious, not only about how to tell stories, but why we tell stories. And I find that's the thing that I think about so often. And I realize unconsciously I've been doing it, as I said, since I was a little kid. Even when I worked as a doctor, the first thing you do with a patient is get a history. And I found that was being exercised. It's through the history of the patient that you understand, you're able to put some sort of narrative. And then starting to make films, I got caught up in the kind of process best described by Joseph Campbell as to how stories are told, the same stories are told over and over again across all cultures, across all time. That was a fascinating thing for me, that we are hardwired for stories. We're telling each other stories now. You will tell stories to your friends and family about what happened when you were at Cannes at this particular moment and so on. So that's a thing that sort of drives me. And because I've been fortunate enough to be working in cinema, this medium which uses all the senses and is always evolving, I just can't help but be swept along on that wave, if that makes sense.
I grew up in the middle of farmland, so I got a lot of that kind of need for speed impulse out of my system, so I'm kind of mellow arm driver these days.
One of the other things about this film, I think, is that exhibitors are reacting to it because it's a great film to see in a big cinema. As a medium of all the things that are happening, it changes the way that we look at film or storytelling. Mobile phones are now one of the mediums, streaming, and so a big film that George has been able, with all of us, but basically with the cast and his own skills, to put together is an audio feast. It really is. I think Anya once described it as a rock and roll sort of ballet of some kind, which is brilliant. So it is worth pointing that out. It is not a normal film. It's an exceptional film to see in a big cinema. Yeah.
Intellectual, what was it, Ben? It was intellectual, philosophical rock and roll opera. I think I finally got it.
All right, we got a question right in front.
Hi, my name is Lieselot van Oppen from Geeks Vibes Nation. This is a question for Anya and Tom. I was wondering if you could explain a bit more about the first scene where they met in like the chase scene. It's both like emotional. You can see how they look at each other and don't say anything, but you can see what they feel. And also it's like obviously a lot of action. And we also talked about how you felt when you saw the movie yesterday, but I also want to know what went through your head when seeing this scene, because obviously the sound, oh my God, it's amazing, and it heightens so much of the emotions and what the actions. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course, thank you. Do you mean Stowaway? Yeah.
I was just so proud of us. I was like, go, Tom, go.
I think it's something that we both talked about a lot with George, there's so many different types of love in the world, and I think a really beautiful love that's not often talked about is, yes, it's romantic, but it's also just a true belief in somebody's ideals. You know, he falls in love with her dream. He falls in love with her promise. He doesn't fall in love with her body necessarily. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing to experience on screen, and especially with somebody as lovely and talented as Tom. You know, I felt like every time that we were just the two of us together, there's so much subtext being played out and we're communicating without words, and so that was lovely for me. You?
Yeah, we wanted to map that really carefully, and the fact is it starts with them being a team without even... he doesn't even know who his teammate is. He thinks it's Black Thumb, and suddenly it's, you know, there's this flowing hair at
Feral
the
creature.
bonnet. Yeah, feral flowing hair. So, yeah, it was nice to map that carefully and know that all of us wanted it to be the most interesting, kind of gentle journey, and not a version of something.
It's also my favorite line in the movie. It's been a hard day. Like, yeah, it has, mate. It really has.
Before we conclude, just for you, George, do you have more Mad Max in you?
Well, there's certainly other stories there, mainly because we wrote, in order to tell the story of Fury Road, we had to know the backstory of Furiosa and of Max in the year before. So and that was a tool for the cast and crew. And so we know the Max story for the year before. But I'll definitely wait to see how this goes before we even think about this.
Should be more than all right. One last thing. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Merci à vous.